So lesson 6, part 3, we've got our MongoDB connected to our web application, and now we want to use Mongoose to run a query, fetch some data, and then we want to pass that data to our view so we can display it. So to do this, we're going to need to go to our cars controller. And Rob, you had mentioned this earlier, we now need to make a reference to our model, right? Our model handles create, read, update, and delete, so our controller needs to reference that model. So we're going to reference our car model. Hang on, saying our path.
When you open the Mongo thing that you starting inputting data.
Yep.
Yeah. Those data, when they stored.
Okay, good question. Right, so where does this actually live?
Yeah.
I will show you.
Because don't have you have them?
Okay, so let me show you. So notice when I started the server, I set up the DB path to my R Freeman data directory. So if I go there, we can look at what's there. So inside of data, inside of DB, whoops, sorry, where is it?
I have in the database.
Yeah, it is stored in here. It's in my data directory. So where I set the DB path for the server, that's where it is. So it needs a directory called data. So that's where the data is. They've changed this a bit. I'm not sure which.
So how can I add stuff?
Okay. How do you add stuff without the wizard? I will show you. So Daniel, if you don't have the wizard, you do want to go back to the, still go to the place, the bin folder for MongoDB. Okay. So go there and grab that path. I'll add another document through the command line. Okay. So grab the path, open up another terminal window, and go to your bin. Okay. Now, instead of running the mongod command, which starts the server, we can run the command mongo. So it gives you this window. It says it's connecting to my local server. So now I need to run a use command to get to my cars database. So I can use cars. It says it's switched. So now I could insert a JSON object here. So here's how I would do that. And it's also in the PowerPoint slides that are on Blackboard. I would run db.cars.insert, and then a set of round brackets. And in here, I would just pass in my JSON data in curly braces. So make something up. Round brackets on the outside, and curly brackets inside. So I'll try and insert this, and then I can run a query here as well, so we can see the data here. I don't need around 2015 because it's a integer. So it tells me that it inserted one document. And now if I run a query, I can try db.cars.find, and I'll then use the .pretty method. So it's not written in one line, but it's nested as an array. You just run the use command. You don't even have to. You just type use and the name of a database, and it creates it. It creates it automatically if it's not doesn't exist. So that's unlike a relational database. If you run a used command on a database that doesn't exist, you don't get it. Okay. All this stuff is actually documented in here, and this is in the lesson 6 folder. So I've given you these commands here, so you can see the structure and how to run them. Okay. Does that help? Okay. All right. So now I just have to figure out why we're not linking to our model properly. Should be this. Okay. So the path is right now, but it's actually saying we have an error probably somewhere in our car model. You have to look at that. We've required mongoose. Oh, whoops. This is a lowercase m. That's why. Sorry about that. I think that should be a lowercase m. We'll see if that fixes it. Yes, that was our error. So that should be lowercase, not capital M on our mongoose model. So our app is still running. So in our cars controller now, before we load the view, we want to use our model to go and fetch all the car documents. So we're going to call car.find. Car is our car model. We don't need to pass any parameters to find. We're not filtering the list. We're getting all of them. And we're going to get one of two things back when we call car.find. We might get an error, which will always be the first parameter. Or our second possibility is we get a list of cars back. We're going to call car.find, and we will either get back, oops, messing up my brackets. If we get an error, we'll log the error for now. Otherwise, we're going to move our res.render statement into the else. So if we got no error, we get cars back. I have to do it this way. I'll write the syntax this way for now. I'd like to change it to use a lambda, but we'll get it working this way. So we call car.find. If we get an error, we're going to log it. Otherwise, we're going to have a list of cars. So we're going to load the index view and pass it our cars that come back. I'll rewrite this syntax in a bit to make sure I get it right. So we're loading the view, but our view is now getting the list of data that our query returns. So the last thing we need to do now is loop through this list of cars in our view to display them. So we can go to our cars index.ejs, and in here, let's create a table. So we'll set up simple table heading, and now we can use a for each loop to display each car. So it notices the properties of our car. Oops. Let's try this. We may have to play with it a bit. Few errors, okay. We could also use a for loop if we need to. I guess we want to. We may have to just use a for loop, but we'll see. Okay. Try it this way. Okay, maybe we're not going to use a for loop for each loop today. We'll try it this way. We may want to change this later with a for loop for each, but sure why our dot there. We'll see what we get now. Okay, no error. The one other thing we're missing here is in order to output dynamic data, we just go back to our, we actually need the equal sign. That's like the equivalent of a PHP echo command. So I missed this. So we need equals, which will actually display those values. I think this should work for us. Okay, so mine is working. Made one mistake, which is why I'm not getting the right data. In my globals, I pointed to the wrong database. My database is called Car Tracker. So on yours, you're probably not getting anything showing up. Right, yeah. There. So there are the cars in my Car Tracker database. So again, inside my globals, I wasn't referencing the right database name. So I actually have two databases, one called Cars and one called Car Tracker. So I'll maybe figure out how we can use a for each loop. They're a little more efficient than a for loop. I'm also just going to put a link up here. We'll go to cars/add. So just like with our scaffolded views from .NET MVC, we'll add a create link above our table. Which will go here, which will give me a 404 because we haven't handled this path. Next week, we'll add, edit, and delete links in here. We don't need them for today. We're not going to get there today. So we'll come back to this view next week to implement that. So our loop should be fairly simple. We're just looping from 0 to through our entire array. We should be able to write this without this function here, but I just have to think of our syntax. Wait. It goes. There we go. That's better, shorter. So I took out the word function before and I just replaced it with the lambda expression, the fat arrow after. So they're equivalent. This syntax is just shorter to type. Don't need the word function. I need the equal sign and the greater than after my list of parameters. Right? Okay, what does it say?
Cars is not defined for the for.
Cars is not defined. Okay, so somehow your view doesn't recognize what this is. So the issue is probably in the controller somehow. So in your controller, we should be getting either error or a list of cars. And then do you have this line here? Are you missing this? Right? So it's loading the view. The view is expecting a car's property, but you're not passing it. So that'll fix that error. Anybody else getting an error when you try to load your view? Danny, you're able to catch up? You got some data in your database? Good. Go back to the view. Okay. I will try it and get it to run with the for each, but I'll do that on my own time and we can revisit that next week. Modifying our loop to use for each, which is just a little bit simpler in theory. So the next thing we're going to want to do with this is we need to, in our controller, map the path that comes in at /add, and then we need to load a new view that will have a form for adding a new car. So I'm going to go back to my controller. We're going to write a get handler for cars/add. Actually, I just want to talk about the path for a second here. We talked about, I mentioned this before, but I want to come back to it. So notice here in our car controller, we have this path that just says / and it loads cars index. Yet over here, we also have a path of /. So how does this work? How does the server know that this one includes the word cars, but this one doesn't? Both of them look like they're at the same path. You're close. It's not necessarily by the name of the controller. Where have we set that any URL that starts with /cars is handled by this controller? So Daniel, in .NET MVC, yes, it would happen automatically. Right. So remember in app.js, this line here says any requests that start with /cars go to that controller. So we don't need /cars in the path here because that's already sent here from app.js. So now we need a router.get at the path add. We don't need to use the database in this case. All we want to do is load a view. and pass in a title. So this method is simpler. We're just going to load a view. We already know how to do this. So now we just need to create the view inside of cars. We need to build add.ejs. Everybody knows how to do this. You did this in your portfolio. You created new EJS views, and you created get methods that rendered those views. So this one is going to obviously have a form on it. So I'll add a new EJS file inside of cars, which is called add. We'll include our header and footer, and we'll build a simple form. So we can add a form here. We'll put on a label and a text box for the make. Now, just the same way in .NET MVC, our control names need to map to the model properties. So you don't want to call this car make or manufacturer if our model is expecting a field called make. Mongoose will automatically map the field inputs to the property names as long as they match. So I'll just copy that field set a few times. Change the second one to model. For the year, I'll add type equals number. And maybe the minimum value as, I don't know, 1900. Color, I'm going to take out required, because some of our cards have no, we didn't store the color. On my final input, I'm taking out the color attribute. It's optional. And then we'll put a submit button down at the bottom. We may have to play with this a little bit. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to look like. So just a standard HTML form with a bit of Bootstrap. That's interesting. Oh. So notice my header and footer loaded. Interesting. But I've lost my CSS, so we have a bit of a path problem here. So the reason is because our links are relative to the style sheets. So we probably want let's try them. There. So by making them go right to the root, that fixes that problem. So in my header, I just prefix style sheets with a slash. My offset didn't work here. I must have done something wrong with my button. Guess in Bootstrap 4, they've gotten rid of the offsets somehow. I'll have to figure that out. Oh. Just choose offset 2. They should push my button over to the right. There. So our form, we also didn't set up method equals post. So if I submit it, it's going to do a get, submit to a get request. So in my form, I need to make sure I set up method as post. So our controller has two methods now, one to load the index view, one to load the add view. Both of these use router.get because they're handling HTTP GET requests. We need one more method now in our cars controller. This one will handle an HTTP POST request, where we actually are going to use our model to save a new one. This will be our last thing we're going to do today. Go back to our controller. And this time, instead of a get method, we're setting up a post method. Cars /add. Again, similar to what we did in .NET MVC. In our controller for edit and create, we had two versions. We had a get method that loaded the form. We had a post method that processed the form submission. So this time, we're going to use router.post. /cars. So much like with .NET MVC, we don't have to map every no, actually, we do need to map the fields, which is a little bit complicated. So use the car model car. So we'll call car dot create. So that's a built-in method to Mongoose. We're going to create a new car. we pass in the make field from the request body. We're going to use Mongoose. We're going to try to create the new car. And again, we'll get back either an error or car object. If we get an error, we'll log it. Otherwise, we want to reload the index view. So our response has a redirect method. So we're going to redirect to the URL /cars. Now there may be a way to shortcut this. I did map all the fields. There might be a way, because the field names on our request body match the field names in our model. We may be able to map them all automatically. We'll try it this way for now. So I'll try and add a car. So we'll add another car. See if I can save it. I didn't refresh my page. So my form wasn't posting. Okay, interesting. We got not found. Let's figure out why. Did my car actually get added? No. We may need to set the action here. Should post to itself, but for some reason we still got a not found. So in my form tag, we'll see if this fixes our 404 error. Let's see. Okay. So that wasn't our problem. Here's the problem. This shouldn't be /cars. This is /add. I had the wrong path in my router. So we don't even need the action. It will always post to itself. My path in my controller was wrong. It had to be /add. Okay, we'll try it again. I read today the definition of an expert is someone who has tried and failed every way you can fail at one thing. So I'm trying to become an expert in this today. Okay, so we'll save. And now we've been redirected back. So our car got added to our collection. and we've redirected. So again, here was our method. I think there's probably a way we can kind of map those fields automatically. I will look into that and check that, and we might rewrite that next week into a more efficient form. So if we have 20 fields in the form, I'm hoping there's a way we don't have to manually map each one. It will just map to the whatever property name is the same. We'll also look at using a for each loop, which is a little more efficient. If I can get that to work, we'll do that as well. So next week, we're going to finish our kind of planning. We're going to create views for edit. We don't need a view for delete. We can just add those buttons here. We'll add a little jQuery pop-up, a little confirmation to delete, perhaps. So we'll get that working next week. And then after that, our plan is 2 lessons on authentication. So one doing local authentication with a package called Passport for username and password. And then we'll also look at doing OAuth. So we'll look at doing things like Google and Facebook login as well. And then we'll want to, just like we did with our NBC Music Store, we'll make all of the car pages private. So you've got to log in to get there. Maybe we'll have a public read-only version, but in order to be able to change anything, you have to be logged into the site. We can show, you know, the username here, log in, log out, register login links, show or hide. We'll be able to do all those things. Okay, so those are our next few lessons. Okay, no lab, nothing for you to do. I know I've given you lots of assignments to do.